So we actually have a phenomenon, it has a phrase nowadays called the windshield effect. And this is a phenomenon where you know, 30 years ago you used to be able to drive at dusk and you were splattered with insects on your windshield, kind of a little bit gruesome. But now we don't actually have that problem. And this is due to pollinator declines and general insect declines that are occurring. So all of these things, these stresses on bees, are human-made, and it's humans who can potentially reverse those stresses if we would like to.
I'm very fortunate. I grew up and lived in the countryside. I used to play out when I was a kid. For, you know, all Saturday, being out in nature was what I used to like to do. The thought that perhaps moving forward for next generations, those things are not going to happen. That's very kind of a very profound realization.
I think that the work that the scientists are doing, especially with this project, is so important that I wanted to work with that to enable other people, you know, outside of the scientific community to perhaps understand the importance of that. On a personal level, I've learned loads as well. You know, I've learned so much about pollinators, and I want to communicate that to other people.
This actually came to me from a very talented postdoc in my lab, Pete Greystock. So he came from the UK and was involved in this collaboration when he started in my lab. What he did was say, listen, this is a big problem. We know that pathogens are a big decline for pollinators, or a big problem for the declines of pollinators. Therefore, when they're in these mass rearing facilities and they're getting a lot of disease, and then we're spreading that disease elsewhere into the world, this can have some major impacts on pollinator declines. Some artists got interested in this issue because it made a lot of press in the UK, and they contacted Pete and several other folks that were involved in this general line of research, and they wrote a grant together, and that grant was funded to try and get some of these issues, like Pete's dissertation, a little bit more out into the public.
My colleague, Professor Andrea Liggins, who's a photographer, who's also part of the show here today, she had been working in the botanical gardens on a project where they were barcoding all the plants in Wales, and in fact all the plants in the world. She thought actually there was a role for art in trying to disseminate some of the issues that are happening, current issues at the moment in terms of plant and insect life.
They wanted artists in a way to interpret what they were doing, because people were finding it very difficult to understand the process, and also because it wasn't very visual. So we kind of visualized, in a sense, the invisible science that was going on there.
Different artists found that they had synergies with particular scientists, so there was something that resonated about the way the scientists worked, and vice versa. The scientists found interesting things going on with the artists, and then the artists then went off and kind of had further connections with the scientists, and over a period of a year and then extending time, it kind of developed even more projects developed out of those connections.
I think this is a really great collaboration where these artists came to the different labs, they became inspired by something that was going on in those labs, generally having to do with not just the beauty of pollinators, but also the function of those pollinators and how different stresses are impacting some of these pollinators and leading to some of the problems that we're having today. I find that, you know, the ways that you connect with different people are very different. And I really enjoyed sort of tapping into a side of my brain that doesn't function all that often to try and communicate this issue of pollinator health in a very different way than I'm used to be maybe the most satisfying part of this project.
You know, I'd like people to come and enjoy it. I'd like people to come and be intrigued. I'd like people to come and ask questions, you know, what's it about? Why are these people here? I'd like people to think, well, you know, there's a great diversity here of styles, and actually that within art practice you can give 9 people the same topic, and not 2 of them are going to come out with the same answer. And I think, you know, again, it's all about that diversity, you know, in terms of our human reception to ideas, but our human responses and our ways of communicating, and actually finding for yourself, you know, when you come to an exhibition, you won't like everything. You might do, but you probably like one thing more than another. And I think, you know, that's really important. We need diversity in communication because, you know, we are diverse people.
My work, I've made it look like a museum case of funny little objects that you might find in a collection of some kind. So responding to that notion of whether it's an art collection or an insect collection, I think works conceptually.
Key thing within my work is I'm a painter, so I'm really interested in colour. And one of the things that I found really fascinating is that although I was aware that iridescence existed, and I had seen iridescent beetles and things like that when I was a child, and I'd found them very kind of intriguing, I hadn't really ever thought about what that actually meant in terms of being a painter.
There's a lot involved in, any organism that you study. There's a lot of just really neat things about those organisms. And some of the works, for example, these bees in the background, I mean, just look at these, the faces of these bees and the diversity of colors and different morphologies are just really fascinating.
Annette Townsend, who's made the fantastic wild strawberry out of beeswax, which was sent from Scott McArt. And as a material, it's got some of the pesticide residues within the material. So it's become part of the sculpture that she's made. And I think that's a really neat idea.
Are there scientific results in here? Yeah, I guess a little bit, but it's not necessarily assessing risk of pesticides on various different farms. But it's something that I think every single person in the audience, even a non-scientist, could connect with.
By sort of thinking outside of your discipline, it starts to get you to question what you do as well. And from my point of view, it's given my work a different kind of purpose.
I see this as sort of a wonderful space where people may not necessarily go just to see this exhibit, but they're exposed to this exhibit fairly indirectly. And I'm guessing that a fair number of people, especially given the comments that I've gotten just over the last week or so that this has been up, I'm guessing a fair number of people see this exhibit and start to think about something they haven't thought about before.
What's really exciting about a library is a point of return. And I think that it's important that those places of return have things that are dynamic within them so that it creates that kind of momentum of thought. On a more metaphorical level, this idea of the whole project was to engage people, not just in a passive, I read about that, but actually to get involved.
Well, maybe the best thing that you can possibly do is encourage habitat. We have this sort of psychological condition for wanting to put a golf course in our front yard. I don't understand why we all have these lawns, especially in suburbia. What is it about a lawn? No one uses these lawns. It's just a piece of green grass. Maybe you play soccer on some of them, but most of the people that I drive by on a day-to-day basis, it's just a lawn for a lawn's sake. Why not fill that lawn up with some wildflowers, some habitat for bees? Just mowing it a little bit less frequently, letting the clover grow a little bit before you mow it down. That can be a really great resource for bees.